So at the beginning of this retreat on the four establishments of mindfulness, I thought that I would try and focus on feelings. Last year I focused on the body, so I thought, well, it's a good time to go to the next step. But I found my mind keep getting drawn back to the body, and just seeing how the body practices are such a great way of uncovering all of these really deeply held beliefs that I have about who I am and who others are. And many of these beliefs are pretty much unconscious. And the body is the main object of clinging for us in this life. So, of course, it's a great way to explore the nature of attachment. But what has come up is the aversion that I have when I feel threatened or when I feel like I need to protect my body. And also a lot of the wrong views, distorted thoughts that I have about my body and what it is and therefore who I am. And the Four Establishments practice is really great at shining a spotlight on how ridiculous it is to identify ourselves with the body. It's ever-changing. It's just a lump of molecules composed of the elements. And you can't even find the body when you really look for it, let alone a self. But even on a more conventional level, this practice has helped me to see how clinging to my body as a source of my identity has disconnected me from other people and caused fear and anger to arise and prevented me from being open and friendly to others. And Venerable Chojen brought this up in her last Shantideva class. She mentioned some of the negative results that can follow when we cling to our bodies and our identities in an unhealthy way. And this is, we become more fearful and isolated and even antagonistic towards others. We end up using our identities to separate ourselves from others and distance ourselves instead of using them to connect and to see commonalities with others. And identities can actually perform both functions. They can both connect us to others, but also separate us from others. And unfortunately, it seems that right now in American society, many people are holding their identities in a way that serves to further disconnection and isolation and suspicion. And I have to say, I've noticed this in my own mind. One example is that on sharing the Dharma days, when many new people come to the Abbey for the first time, I find myself being drawn to certain people, wanting to connect with them and feeling comfortable around them. But then there's also other people who I find myself wanting to avoid or ignore. And when I see this happening in my mind, I usually feel pretty ashamed because fighting against prejudice discrimination has been something really important to me ever since I knew what these terms meant. So of course I don't want to further that in my own mind, my own behaviors. So in exploring why this happens, I can see that it all comes back to fear. I'm reluctant to talk to certain people because I'm afraid that I'll be insulted or criticized or demeaned. And this is basically aversion to the worldly concern of blame and also wanting praise and good reputation. So what is all of this based on? And I see that my patterns of attraction or aversion are based on the person's body. And then what social identities I impute on that body, such as age, race, gender, social status, economic status. And I can see how grasping at their body and that label as the real person, the inherently existent person, causes fear and conflict to arise quite often. Not all the time, but quite often. So I've been using this retreat to explore my own relationship to gender and race, and I've seen how grasping at the idea that I am a woman and this is my body predisposes me to fear and anger towards certain groups of people. And grasping at the idea that I'm a person of color and at this skin color also predisposes me to anger and fear towards others. And in part, this is because I've heard countless stories about how women and people of color have been subjected to abuse, harassment, victimization in this country and all over the world. And many family members, while I was growing up, they told me, you're going to be a target because of your gender and your race, so be on the lookout. But what's interesting is that in my life, I actually haven't had a whole lot of experiences where I felt truly threatened or insulted based on my physical attributes. And this came out in a discussion that we had during, I think, EML, Exploring Monastic Life, a couple of years ago. We talked about gender and how that affected our aspirations for ordination. And many of the women in the room said, actually, I haven't really experienced a whole lot of discrimination being a woman. And when I heard that, at first I was like, what are you talking about? But then I looked at my own experience and I'm like, wow, that's kind of true. So I see that, the stories I've heard and maybe the past generations' experiences hasn't really matched my own, and I need to recognize that a little bit more. Of course, people have said racist things to me. They've acted rudely, made inappropriate advances, but those instances have been few and far between the more positive interactions that I've had with people. In a BBC a little while ago, I mentioned that it irritated me when people asked, where are you from? And Venerable Chodron later asked me, why does that irritate you? And I said, it's because I assume the person has a bad motivation. They're trying to make me feel like I'm strange or I don't belong or like they're better than me. But I've also really been looking at that, and I think actually most of the time they have at least a neutral motivation, probably a positive one, wanting to connect and to learn more about other cultures and countries. So this happened to me just a few days ago. I was at a doctor's office in Spokane in the waiting room, and this older white man, he looked at me and he said, are you Native American? And I said, no, I'm Filipino. I mean, I could have said I'm half, but then that just requires more explanation. And he said, well, you really look Native American. And I said, well, the Native American people originally immigrated from Asia to, North American continent. And he said, oh, wow, it sounds like you know a lot. And you're really pretty, and I like your hair. And I hope to see you again. So I like the hair part, actually. That was surprising. So it was clear that he didn't want to insult me. That's not why he opened the conversation. Although I'm not sure his intentions were actually that pure. But I went away with a good feeling, that I had connected with somebody. Yeah. And I also like to remember that I've actually benefited in a few ways from my racial background. I had preferential hiring status into the US government. And I also think it was a factor in being admitted to University of Virginia. And I've identified with other minority statuses also throughout my life. And those also have in turn led to anger and resentment against people who I don't even know in society as a whole. Another consequence has been self-hatred, identifying with my body because it's not the way I want it to be. And no matter what I do, it's not going to be the shape that's on the magazine covers. It's not going to be the hair color won't be, the eye color won't be what is standard. And yeah, I'm so thankful that now I see that seeing the body as an enemy is just the worst thing that you could possibly do. It's so toxic and, causes bulimia and cutting and crazy dieting and muscle mania. So many terrible things come out of that. So going forward, I want to conceive of my body in ways that help me to feel connected to others and to hold my identities in ways that don't lead to fear and suspicion and isolation. And thankfully, Buddhism has so many tools and pieces of guidance on how to do this. And the first one is that to see our commonalities, to see that we all want happiness. We don't want to suffer. We all get old. We all get sick. We all die. And then based on that, to practice generosity, to practice loving kindness, compassion towards others, dedicating my body to the service of the three jewels, which is something that we do when we ordain. That's been really helpful in turning my body into a tool for benefit in the world. And then, of course, working for the benefit of all sentient beings by cultivating bodhicitta has helped me to really see my body as a means to connect rather than withdraw. So I really want to keep doing these body meditations because I see they're so powerful and they dig up so much stuff that is always there in the background and influencing how we see the world, but we're really not aware of it. And now is a really good time to do that because of all the rhetoric and the anger that's in the public sphere about race and gender, and all the activists who are mobilizing in order to create safe spaces for minorities. But in the process, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of grief that hasn't been fully processed. And doing these meditations is helpful because it's a very neutral thing. You come to just see the body as an object, and you get this really balanced mindset. And I think that can really help people who are hugely attached to or hugely ashamed of their identities, to help them get past that and to learn how to talk to others, who are different than them, or at least not to have so much anger towards them, to recognize that they too also have a body. It's going to get sick, it's going to age, it's going to die, and it's never going to be the way that any of us want it to be. So may we all learn to use our bodies in ways that increase love, compassion, and altruism in the world, and to stop using it as tools for just short-term meaningless pleasure or as weapons of harm, whether we feel justified in that harm, doing it defensively, or whether we just don't know how else to connect other than through anger. And I think sometimes anger is a way for that people are trying to connect with one another, a way to get their voice across. But often it doesn't have that effect. So may we all learn tools to connect in healthy ways.